Welcome back, everyone. So this track is now focusing on AI in FinTech, the final session of the day. Before we start, for those who might have missed one of the sessions, I will just go through what happened throughout the day and how we progressed then, what was the intent of the session. So we started with the keynote presentation from Vishal, and that was giving the overall landscape in the FIS and innovation areas. Then we went into introduction to line of businesses to help the startups to understand FIS terminologies, line of businesses, sub-segments within that, various initiatives that we're running, key products areas, so they can get familiarized with the names of the products as well as the segments, as well as the traction that we have. After that, we went into more about how do you engage with that building block you're related to or you fit into, or multiple building blocks that you actually may be related to. And that's what FIS Code Connect and FIS Developer Program was. And post that, we went into the FIS strategy session where various programs within FIS, let it be Aspira program, venture program, as well as the Alliance Partner Program guys, we're discussing about how they can help startup ecosystem from funding point of view, from network point of view, from alliance point of view to grow their business and grow with FIS as such. Then we went into the three tracks. First was digital assets, and we went through all the three segments, and then we went into the second part, which is data innovation. All these recordings will be available for you for future reference. So for certain duration of time, we'll communicate in the emails about that. And today, the last session of the day is on AI and FinTech. We have a panel here. I'll just go around the table to introduce the panel, and then we'll start with the topic there. So we have David Berglund, SVP Global Head of Artificial Intelligence at FIS. So David Berglund services as SVP Head of Artificial Intelligence AI. He oversees the development of AI, including oversight on AI/ML strategy, intelligence, automation, corporate data, performance engineering, and transformational efforts. He's a guest lecturer at Wharton School and studied at Stanford University, the University of St. Thomas MBA, and Loyola University at Chicago and the BS. We have Dr. Anil Ghosh, AI/ML quantitative analyst today with us, a specialist at FIS Global, and Dr. Rana is internationally recognized AI/ML researcher, currently working with AI Ops team as a principal data scientist. He worked as a lecturer in School of Information Technology and Mathematical Sciences at University of Ballarat, Australia. He did his master's and PhD from Australia with Academic Excellence Award in Artificial Intelligence. As an academic of international reputation, he has published nearly 80 publications in various international journals, books, chapters, and conferences. We have Andrew, SVP Corporate Affairs and CSO at FIS Global. Andrew serves as a SVP Corporate Affairs. In this role, Andrew is responsible for leading the company's government relations, regulatory relations, and ESG, which is environmental social governance programs. Previously, Andrew served as special assistant to the president at White House during presidency of George W. Bush. And during this time, he also served in senior roles at U.S. Office of Management and Budgets, OMB, Electronic Governance Office, and U.S. Department of State. We also have Ben with us, Benjamin Bellman, Senior Director of Venture Investments at FIS Global. Ben is focuses on exploring new trends and concepts in early stage startups, VC funds, investments, and creation of new companies and partnerships with venture studio partners. Benjamin is AI thought leader, angel investor, and active inventor, having filed numerous AI and FinTech patents. We have a very interesting panel here today, and now we'll go down the table with a couple of key areas that we have planned, and then afterwards we'll take questions based on what we have received from the startup who have applied so far to the program. So welcome everyone, and we'll start first with AI at FIS as a key topic. So this question is to David first, and then followed by that to Ben. So David, on a very high level, can you describe the AI or the landscape of AI in various FIS products, or the key innovations that are happening on the AI front in the banking, in the capital markets, and merchant solutions, and interesting things that we'd like to mention in that context. So over to you, David.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much, Prashant. There's so much happening, frankly, and that probably shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, we've got multiple businesses with a tremendous amount of data, right? We are making, helping money move across the globe, across capital markets, merchant banking. I think you guys have probably heard that story, but each of those transactions becomes an opportunity to learn something, right? And also, we're a large organization, 80,000 people. So if we look at it from two lenses, internally, we've got 80,000 people, which are chances to learn about operations and how we can become more efficient and streamlined, more thoughtful and predictive in how we operate. And secondly, when we think about how do we build new products, the market is moving exceptionally fast, and there's just a lot of pressure to compete and to keep advancing the use of data and these capabilities like machine learning and AI. If we look at banking, just to start there, I think historically we've seen a number of stops and starts in the space, whether it's early on, folks trying things with chatbots, some personalization. We started to get into, of course, AML, fraud, those spaces just with a lot of data. And now I would say we're starting to see a bit more interesting things happening, both from a marketing lens in terms of really that advanced, how do you figure out the next best action to support clients? And also looking at things like risk and portfolio risk across loans. So really interesting, and thinking more creatively, not just the obvious things that come to mind, but we're starting to see really people taking a chance and trying out new things. In the merchant space, again, I would say obviously fraud, there's a massive need and growing interest and application there. But also as we start to think about how can we make more transactions go through, allowing people to make better decisions, or firms to make better decisions about which transactions they should accept or decline. How do they recycle transactions so that they can make sure that they get as much money, help consumers buy what they need, but also being prudent in terms of kind of that risk reward standpoint. And lastly, capital markets. There's actually been a lot of news there. If we look at our partnership with C3, or even just the things that we've been doing internally in terms of capital allocation, again, like loan and fraud, there's significant opportunities across the portfolio, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
Thank you, David. So Ben probably can augment the answer from David and probably go into the specificities for AI in banking, capital markets, and merchants from your viewpoint.
Yeah, the interesting thing really that we're seeing over the last few years, there was really an interesting development that just makes it much easier to build AI applications, to build AI solutions. Right? We're a big enterprise, there's a lot of policies, but that whole shift to the cloud made it much easier to build new things, right? So it's really like software engineers can use something from the big cloud providers, from more specialized vendors. We have a partnership in capital markets with C3. There's out-of-the-box building blocks. Low-code, no-code is out there. There's always a little bit of a trade-off in using that to kind of like speed up things, and then you get locked in, obviously. But we're seeing it really across the board. Teams that are not traditionally, that haven't been traditionally in the AI space, are now using these novel tools, or some of them are even fully fledged products, and they are basically stitching things together. And it's really just an API in the end of the day. And you can build models. You still have to understand how the whole end-to-end ecosystem works, and what do accuracies mean, and what do scores mean. But it's really, we're seeing usage of AI and obviously machine learning, deep learning, in really a number of use cases that people haven't thought about 5 years ago. So we're looking at, for example, smart order routing on the capital market side. We're using operational customer experience things. So I think Rana is going to talk about that later. We're using it even for software development. You probably heard about OpenAI. They have developed essentially pseudocode generators, or even real code generators, where you can basically say, I want to write a program that does this in Java and C#, and it's going to give you a snippet of code, and you can work off of that. And the efficiency that we drive, I think Dan Wakeman was mentioning that on the previous call, we have about 20,000 developers plus contractors. We're probably one of the biggest software development shops. And driving efficiency and building best-in-class applications, leveraging some of these tools, I think that's a very exciting development, right? You can really, it's a mature market if you think about it. There's all these tools out there. The challenges that we're seeing is how do we integrate? How do we do ML ops, ML operations, running these things at scale? We're not a small business, right? We're not a startup. We want to run scale, all the products that we have, hundreds of products. They traditionally mass scale, enable a large number of clients, and they're solving, whatever our clients' pain points are. And then another thing is obviously the data. We talked about that previously on the previous call. And what people forget about, especially in today's day and age, is talent, right? So finding the talent to build these solutions. And it's not necessarily that you have to have like 20 years of experience in AI to build some of these products, right? It's really like having that curiosity and being like understanding kind of like, how do I not have to reinvent the wheel to build something novel and leverage something that exists today? I think that's really the talent that we have been looking for. I was on David's team previously, set up the data science team there over the last 2 years. And we really spent a lot of time selecting talent. So 15, 20 interviews per person that we hired. So it was really the right thing to do. But it's an exciting development right now. There's tons of things out there. It's really, market is saturated. It's really kind of like, what do you pick and choose to build the best application for the unique use case that you're trying to chase?
Just to build on that, Ben, because I totally agree with how you framed that up. And I thought of a few more things, because you're right. Like there's this sense of readiness where all of a sudden, to your point, there's more maturity, which leads to confidence. So I think before, a lot of businesses and product owners were just, there's some trepidation around, should I invest, should I, try to do more? And all of a sudden we're seeing real results with the technology. I mean, you drove the creation of the ML ops platform at FIS. All of a sudden now that means that when you're seeing startups, we can all of a sudden use that, our sandbox, and build a lot faster. So it's all of these forces combining to make it much more real. It's not the hype that it was, I would say 5-10 years ago.
All right.
Thanks, David, Ben. So Ben, you also have a view from the ventures angle on this topic, right? So given that there's a broad ecosystem and there are a lot of new innovations which are still possible, and as David rightly said, that we have reached a maturity where now we can see the real results coming, and not which is more theoretical or something which is possible, may possible. But here there is a real value that is getting created, and that is something which is quite into broad spectrum, and there is a scope for every new innovation to happen. So from your ventures angle or ventures lens, what do you see in the market today as key areas where partners are ready and they are providing solutions, or key trends where the supply side is coming, and what are the key demand areas? Is there any mismatch there? And from a FIS perspective, what do you see? What do you say to the partners that we have in this call, startups that we have called?
Yeah. I mean, there's tons of things happening. I mean, you probably saw public market developments, right? So we're in a bear market. Valuations are going down, and it's interesting that how that shakes out, or how that influences the private markets, right? So the venture capital markets. We're definitely seeing a reduction in deal activity, so funding is definitely down. But really the bar now was 2021, where you had massive investment. And really in the fintech space, that was really largely driven by the crypto world, right? So decentralized solutions, things related to smart contracts. So that whole ecosystem of decentralized cryptocurrency type of DeFi solutions, where everyone got excited because obviously the tokens were getting shooting through the roof, and valuations were really high, and a lot of companies got excited and invested in all these companies left and right, and it wasn't really clear what's the true benefit and the true value, and what is the risk associated with some of those DeFi constructs. That is kind of like slowing down a little bit. There's still some funds pouring massive amounts of capital into those areas. But it's kind of like this mean reversion if you think about capital markets, right? So there was that excitement last year, and now people are saying we're down, but we're back to 2020, 2019 levels in terms of deal activity and size. And the tier one players really on the venture capital side, they're moving left, they're shifting left to more early stage, right? So you had those big deals, hundreds of millions of dollars and billions in some cases, where people were investing at a very late stage because they thought that it's a very mature product. We're going to bring this to market, IPO this or exit this somewhere else. And now it's like smaller check sizes, so more early stage. You have tier one firms that are coming in at seed stages, and there's definitely some reduction or down rounds that you're seeing where valuations are going down. but the activity is not slowing down much if you compare to 2019, 2020 levels. From a trend perspective, so one thing that we're really chasing is looking at industry adjacencies. So not necessarily just on the fintech side, right? We've done a lot of investments on the fintech side. We have an accelerator program in the US with the Venture Center in Arkansas. Really, we've seen a lot of good companies come through that and grow through that program. And we've essentially monitored those companies and worked with them. And really, the way how we're set up as a venture capital arm is we have 3 divisions. One is direct investments into startups. We also work with venture studio partners where we spin out new companies. So creating net new startups, and we look for founding teams. That's a very exciting thing. And then the third thing is we're investing also in VC firms where we have essentially topic firms that are looking at things like DeFi, things like unbanked populations. So very interesting things there. And then we have another team that is kind of doing more research, exploration, prototyping. That's the team I'm on. So I'm like the technology subject matter expert on the data and AI side. But really the trends that we're chasing, I would say right now, is that adjacency, looking beyond just fintech, just finance, looking at kind of like what's happening in commerce, right? So what do we see? Things like supply chain finance, supply chain payments. There's a major market that is largely untapped from a finance fintech perspective, right? So supply chain had that big evolution over the last few years with the pandemic. A lot of VC funding went into that, and now we're seeing a lot of things popping up on the financial side or fintech side of the whole commerce value chain, right? All the way from like manufacturing, supply chain, logistics to retailers, and then you have the e-commerce side, obviously, and then the consumer side. The consumer side traditionally is getting a lot of attention because it's very visible, but the front end of that, right to the left again, it's a largely inefficient process, and you have a lot of small players that don't have a lot of good technology to leverage, right? So it's exciting space to look at. One more thing, and I'm talking a lot here, but the data side, really interesting. We're looking at essentially novel ways of collecting data, right? So I think you mentioned it on the earlier call, there was satellite data that we can use to track foot traffic patterns. There's Edge ML, so we're deploying deep learning. There's companies that are deploying deep learning in cameras, for example, or on top of security feeds to track store activity, right? So obviously doing that in a safe and responsible way. We don't want to breach any PII regulations, data privacy regulations, but doing it at the edge is giving you the advantage that you don't have to transmit a video feed with people on it, right? You just want to extract specific data points of behavior to leverage that in a machine learning model or just track activity, right? So exciting developments on the data side all around. So I could talk about this probably all day.
Thank you, Ben. Andrew, over to you about the ESG. I think it's one of your key areas of interest, and the overall governance and regulations around the AI. Since you have been in influencing positions at the government level, based on your experience, how is the AI space in terms of ethics, in terms of other areas also? Probably we'll touch it later, but let's start with ESG first. And if you can express your views about where we stand and how prominently the AI is getting used here, and to what level of maturity we are at this stage. Is it at a very early stage, or we have reached to a level where now we can surely say that, yes, there's a clear road ahead?
Yeah, no, those are all great questions. And, touching on, some of the issues that David and Ben were bringing up, and the doctor, I'm sure, will bring up too. There really is this really interesting intersection of technology development and the trends that we're seeing, and things like DeFi, Web3, all of those kinds of things. And when we think about starting with an ESG lens or sustainability lens, and what some call it, people think of sustainability or ESG as really only just about the environment sometimes, and that's only one piece of it, right? One of the legs of the stool. And really, when we think about ESG and how it's relevant to the fintech world and to financial services, it actually, I would sort of sum it up into kind of a phrase of enabling sustainable finance, okay, and commerce. And what does that mean? And how does that actually touch upon our business and creating opportunities? So if you look at the larger investor space, they're saying, when we look at ESG, it's not just doing good, but it's doing good that actually drives the economy and fueling things, right? You've heard a lot about that in terms of green jobs, the environment, at some point, and I know that our company has looking at some of these things, especially in Ben's world, in terms of the FIS ventures, is really what kind of opportunities are there for powering carbon trading markets, for instance. We know that eventually carbon is going to be capped in the world at some way. How it gets done, over what time horizon is that going to happen? But we know that there will need to be systems in place to help that trading, to help track that. We know there'll need to be data streams that are coming in, right, to our capital markets business and to capital markets customers that want to go, and AI plays into that, and is how can AI be leveraged to do that data analytics and come up with those insights that we may not be coming up with on our own, right? Because there are going to be so many data points coming in around sustainability and the environmental stuff alone. I mean, greenhouse gas accounting and trying to track all of this stuff and what meaningful decreases are difficult. The same thing for climate modeling, right, going forward. And, you know, banks in particular are going to have to figure out for their investments and capital markets customers, when they're investing in companies, when they're investing in hard assets and real estate, or powering companies that are investing in those things, is what is the climate risk to those particular areas. And climate modeling is very difficult, right? I mean, it's like trying to model the stock market, right? So AI will be really beneficial in terms of how do we do this modeling and build these things into it. So there's really a confluence of those things. I think Ben also just touched on a second ago about sort of the underbanked or really alternative banking, right? Because underbanked in the United States is a relatively low percentage compared to the rest of the world. But we also know in the rest of the world, banking channels aren't necessarily the first place that people go to manage their finances, right? There's all kinds of alternative financial services products, you know, digital wallets and other things like that that are managed in a different way. And I think touching on the government relations piece or the government public policy piece, all of those laws are trying to catch up to say, how do we protect these consumers with these alternative financial models, right, to make sure that they're not at risk and that their funds are protected. In the United States, obviously, there's in many countries, there's a very consumer protection built into the traditional financial modeling, like banks and the FDIC insurance and those kinds of things. But how does that now catch up with consumer protections as we think about going forward? Where AI is going to be coming into focus in terms of the larger financial inclusion is a couple interesting ways going forward. One is, you know, what are those analytics that we can say in loan portfolios and lending portfolios or banking portfolios? Hey, these communities or these populations are underserved, and how do we do a better job collectively as a financial and commerce ecosystem of reaching out and targeting those to bring them into the system so that they can be banked or have financial tools to connect into the digital economy. When there's cash, it's easy, right, to have a trading economy, but as more goes digital, right, how do you make sure people have accessibility in a place, the ability to connect to that digital ecosystem? And if you look at our company's ESG report that we just put out, our new one, the first chapter is really about how we ensure that nobody is left behind as we can transition to a digital economy, right? So this ecosystem has a responsibility. Our permission to operate in the world and globally is making sure that those that have the least technology or the least access to things have that access, right? And that's a big push. And that's why it's chapter 1 for the last 3 years in our sustainability report, for that very reason. Because if we don't do that, we will have failed as an industry and failed as a company if we don't make sure that we're connecting folks. And so AI plays a big role in that, again, from that modeling, but also just think about what's being created now, but the data points that can come in. Now we can look at alternative credit scores, right? We don't have to base things just on the data that we have had historically through the major credit reporting bureaus. We can now take a wider set of social data. We can take things at the point of sale. We can look at what is the money that's coming in, and we can do analytics on that to determine, okay, based on the cash flow of this particular company, we can provide small business loans to that and know that they can do. We have financial products that FIS offers all over the world that do those particular things. And then the thing that we have to watch for, and where some of the public policy concerns around this, is bias, right? Humans have bias when we think about inclusivity, racial, gender, et cetera, bias. And AI is just as good as what we feed it or what we program into it. Right. And so we have to be very careful, and the public policymakers are looking at this and saying, now wait a minute, how do we ensure we're not accidentally building human biases into the AI, or we're not feeding it things that make it, we've all heard the horror stories of chatbots and other things becoming racist and other things because of the data sets that they've been fed. And that would be like even a human being, if you're only exposed to certain data sets and you're going to do machine learning and self-learning, you're going to end up with those results. So that's something that the regulators are really looking at to say, so when we really look at what the public policy agenda it is related to AI is saying, one, how are you making sure that AI is not making unfair decisions that have built-in bias? Two, how is that technology being leveraged for good, right? To expand the aperture with which we may want to loan and do credit and all that kind of thing too, while mitigating the risk, right? Making smart decisions to protect the stability of the financial ecosystem. And then this sort of third wave, fourth industrial revolution, DeFi, all of that kind of stuff, AI in the mix of that, how's that done in a way that provides consumer protection? So I think those are some of the larger public policy issues and how do we make a more inclusive system just holistically?
If I can real quick, just to build on that, Andrew, very well said. You touched on like the ethics piece and the public policy coming in. And one of the recent things that we're seeing in the market, I'm sure you're tracking this, is the need for hiring and looking at, sure, we can use models to improve and optimize the speed of hiring. It takes a long time. But if we use historical data, we may find that organizations are making biased decisions. And actually that work, that realization, there's now some legislation happening in New York, inspired some of our colleagues within the People Office to reach out to our team. And we're now building an AI ethics set of policies and guidelines because it is so critical in terms of how we at FIS apply AI. And then secondly, I just wanted to highlight, you talked about all the good that we're doing and the need to focus on good. Well, we're actually running an AI for Good hackathon with 4 other corporate partners in Jacksonville, including students from UNF, University of Northern Florida, solely focused on improving the environmental and good that we can use with data sets from an energy company in the area. So it's so exciting. There's so much opportunity, and we're actually using it to drive good for the community as well, which is exciting.
Thanks, David. So in ESG area, a question I handed to you, the trust based on which the AI models are going to work, that there are startups and partners in this call who have combined these two fabrics where trust comes from a DLT, traceability comes from there, and the AI comes from, and the confluence of these two things are trying to solve the ESG. My question to you is, what do you see as a success to the, because there is a lot of non-standard, it's not something which is standardized as of now. There is a standards that are coming in, there are this newness to this area. So with this given scenario, what you will say to the partners who are working on confluence of traceability, DLT, and AI to get the ESG, and where do we stand in terms of getting closer to standardizing the framework itself? Are we too far? Is it too confusing? And is it even worth for the partners or startups to spend time, or should they just wait for getting the frameworks more matured, or whether that will ever happen? So that's the question.
I'll take a first shot at it, and then David is closer to sort of the day-to-day on standards and frameworks on it. What I would say from a public policy standpoint, ESG in general, right? There's a lot of, it's hard to drive global standards, number one. And every regulator or policymaker in different parts of the world may have a little bit different view on what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. And I do, so my first piece of advice is you shouldn't wait because you're part of the conversation, right? So if you look at what's been happening with crypto over the last several years, right? There's not definitive regulation in all markets yet on it, right? The United States in particular is still figuring out, Europe is still figuring out, the APAC is still figuring out, LATAM countries are still figuring it out in terms of what it means. But in some of the markets where there has been not immediate regulation, we've seen some positive and negatives play out, right? And obviously we've seen more recently that what they call the crypto winter, right? Where, all of the valuations and the things around crypto. But if we had already put in regulations and not had the crypto winter come or some of these downsides, we might not know all the public policy issues that we should be thinking about. So sometimes rushing to create a standard isn't the right answer because some things need to play out over time and as the technology evolves over the time. Now, most of the crypto companies, for instance, though, are pushing, hey, here is our views of how things should be normalized or standardized in terms of what's working and what's not working, right? And so everybody has position, including FIS. We've been very much at the table in Washington, working with US Treasury. We've been working in the UK on these issues as well in terms of giving our voice, because we sit in a very unique place in the ecosystem, right? Where we say, hey, we work with financial institutions, we work with capital markets companies, we work with merchants, and so we have a less specific interest, and we have a holistic view of what we think is best for everyone in the market going forward. So I would say I don't, and in particular on the ESG side, because it's such a broad thing, I think you'll see some standards around climate, you'll see some standards around some social things, including AI. I think you'll see some standards around other things, but at the same time, you can have standards or regulation in one country, but we're such a connected ecosystem that, we'll have to see how it plays out and normalizes over time globally. Even financial regulation as it exists today, and we're not even talking about how ESG is incorporated into the sort of newer financial regulation long term, that took decades to really develop to the standard reporting that we see internationally. And there are still discrepancies between how we see financial reporting today. So when you look at some of this stuff, it'll never be 100%, but it'll grow and mature over time is my personal view. David?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's things like this are just challenging. There's no right answer. I think in general, the intention is good from both companies and the governments and policymakers, just to try to improve and advance how we think about all of these, both technologies, how we apply them, even how companies invest and deploy their assets. Whether they're right or wrong, I don't think we'll know until after the fact. Then we'll judge ourselves, I guess down the line. That's human nature. I do think that folks have the right intentions. It's just a matter of continuing to push and advance, because there is no right answer. It's just about putting our heads together and balancing how we invest our time and resources, and hopefully we do it in a way that in generations to come they laud us and don't criticize us.
Thanks, David. Now, on the other end of spectrum, where the regulations as well as compliance is very clear, Regtech area specifically, how do you see the current state of the market? I'm sure it's much more mature, much more clear, but what are the opportunities that you see in Regtech to further develop, or all the innovation in Regtech is already done and there is nothing to innovate on the AI space? I'm sure that's not the case, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably just at the beginning, right? And that's true for so many things. Part of it is the requirements around compliance and upstanding your kind of regulatory position it's time consuming. And historically, we would look at it being a very manual process, largely driven by professional service firms to solve for this very manual set of jobs and tasks. And I think that's probably true on the government side as well. And they're in the positions of trying to look through all of this data and make sure, compliance and avoiding, risk issues, black swans that they're trying to prevent. So again, good intentions, but we now have this large, complex set of activities that firms have to manage. And I would say what we're starting to realize is that in all of that data, there is generally a fair amount of consistency. And when you've got consistent data and lots of it, you can usually find patterns. And that's where I would say we've shifted from some automation over the last few years. And now many firms, including FIS, we're helping to enable banks and firms in the capital market space to not just optimize the efficiency of how we manage regulatory kind of requirements, but how do we take that data to the next level? Because if we can solve the first problem of helping someone understand and spotlight kind of risk that may be latent within their portfolios or their operating structure, we can also use that to optimize their decision making. So I think it's a really exciting time to say, we'll solve job one, which is managing the requirements, but let's also add a little bit more value because it's there and we see the path to make that happen. And Ben, we've been working on, I know your background is actually in this space for many years. Anything you touch on there that I missed?
Yeah, no, the Regtech space is really interesting, right? So there's a lot of opportunity, and I was in consulting in that space, worked in preparing documents or data for regulators and sending them over and helping them do their analytics and find what they're looking for. But it's largely, as David mentioned, it's largely captured by professional services firms, and they have making really good margins on the work they're doing because they have semi-automated processes. They have, I don't know, university graduates that are doing their work at a low rate and they're charging high rates out to the clients. And they have really strong relationships with all those major institutions. And they keep getting that work. And some of the work is ad hoc, most of the work is more recurring reporting. And there are definitely some players there. But that exchange part, how do we work from an institution all the way to the regulator and exchanging data and exchanging insights? That's something we're actually trying to tackle right now. There's a new business we're trying to set up with the one of the cloud vendors, and we're addressing exactly that gap, that we want to be able to exchange data more easily. We want to provide new experiences, not just your plain Excel spreadsheet. We want to throw in AI and ML to process the data, use unstructured data in a way that's novel, and yeah, just minimize manual work, make it more efficient, because I've seen firsthand there's a lot of manual work happening there that is not necessary in this day and age anymore. Yeah.
When it's so old, I think part of the challenge too, and this is what excites me, is you think of these black swan events or even COVID and the reaction, the housing crisis, so much of the data, you look at these cycles that governments who are looking at the data have to operate under, it can be months, 12 months or more, in which they're looking historically to figure out, well, what happened? Okay, well, of course, you're going to have to, try to, chase your tail. Instead, all of a sudden now, what if we could look at the underlying data from firms and help, solve issues faster? That's better for everybody if we can stop another, major financial crisis.
Yeah, and one thing to add there is it's really the data access. We work with the FDIC on a prototype project, and at the beginning of the pandemic, they really had issues getting insights into what was happening at the banks, what were the positions they were having, and they defaulted to the most simple solution by just calling the banks on a daily basis. So if you think about it, that was 2020. There was no standardized, they had some approaches to standardized data transmission, but it's really a PDF form that they basically sent out and they populated, and there's some processing that depending on the maturity of the bank that is filling this out, there's some more automated processing, but really it's largely manual, and they didn't know what was happening in some of the higher risk banks that were taking risky positions. They literally called them up on a daily basis, and in some cases they traveled out there and looked at the books. So it's pretty crazy that was still happening in 2020, right? And probably is today to some extent.
I bet there were a few faxes that they sent out too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
So next topic I want to touch upon is the role of AI in client experience and how that space is evolving, and what FIS is doing there, and what partners, if any, we are working with. So probably David, you can start, and then I'll.
Sure. I'll be brief. I mean, the fact is we're all consumers. So much of when we think of FIS, we're looking at it through the lens of B2B. And that's true. And obviously we think of our clients and wanting to give them the best experience. But I also think I'm a consumer. We're all consumers on the call here, all the partners who are joining us. And you think of the advancements of technology, the rising bar expectation of personalization, speed, efficiency. Well, we're trying to do the same thing for our clients. Nobody wants to have that call that Ben just described. I mean, that's generally speaking, when was the last time you called Uber or Amazon? It just doesn't happen. So what we're thinking about is how can we, help avoid the problem using AI, and Ron is going to talk more about this as well, thinking about making sure incidents go away. We're self-healing, the incidents don't happen, but also we can predict what someone's going to want. So we're using it within our IVR, our chatbots, our service center, all of those, we've got projects underway or have been deployed to optimize and make sure that before someone has a problem, we help them self-serve. If they're calling us, we've optimized the agent's understanding, give them the information they need, and the consumer or the client, so that the experience is effortless and simple, because that's what I want as a consumer, and I'm sure our clients want the same thing.
Thanks, David. Now let's switch the context to more kind of enablement. And I think Rana, you're on the call. You have been working on this area for AI ops, and your experiences with the different technology stacks in past and how it is evolving. So if you can start with AI ops, and then we can go into the other topics which are more futuristic.
Sure. I'd like to start with what is AI ops. It's artificial intelligence for IT operations. We are hearing this term extensively these days, but interestingly, it was only 5 years back coined by Gartner. And the main goal, if I can put it in a very simple term, is to help the organization to operate at the speed they require and provide and deliver an excellent, satisfying customer satisfaction, right? So this is the main goal. Now, AI ops at present state, also we understand that it's like a first principle now in IT operation. And the change that we are seeing that an IT services mainly, they're not only changing itself from being proactive to reactive, but also it is helping organization to do a value creation. So this has been recently an ask for IT organization. But the main, it's easier said than done. The challenges are multifold. And I'd like to say, for example, the first and foremost, an important point that we have to remember that when we have to create a future-ready AI ops solution, sometimes, people think that, to build a tool with few AI capabilities is actually the solution. But it's not like that. And then another important point, probably, what actually happens is, AI ML, mostly the value the society has got, we have to understand is mainly coming from supervised type of problem, which is probably, like I will say 1 or 2% of what the value addition actually it has provided to the society. Really, the hidden, the actual, benefit the society will get through unsupervised technique, which is almost like definitely more than 90% or so. Now, having said that, through this unsupervised model, it's very much related to AIOps and other AIML techniques. But when you want to find complex pattern and you want to build core models based on big data, you have to rely on these methods. But the challenge here is when you want to build a lot of these unsupervised models, you need a very different scientific methodology. There is no one-stop shop here. And we have to really understand how the business can transform its data to knowledge.
Thanks, Rana. So Rana, there are startups who have into more kind of experimental AI. I'm not sure whether it's still experimental or not, but there are stacks which are in the federated learning. There are stacks which are into more privacy budgeting, as well as have you seen real applications and success of these things where you have different data sets owned by different organizations, and it's possible to have a model which can be trained across to increase the overall performance of that model, the accuracy of the model, because this seems to be a real problem where we have data silos and ownership with different organizations, and your models have to be trained on those things, and then maybe in the fraud detection or credit scoring or other areas. This sort of things is important, and to some level we are already using that in our like some of the applications where we have a Google Keyboard, which is using to some extent, right? So what's your view on this problem statement or use case, I'll say, or where you have data sets which are spread across multiple banks, and they cannot collaborate because they don't trust each other, and then there is a need for combining these data sets in a manner where it can create new intelligence. So yeah.
Sorry, actually, I think there are a few parts, the questions you have asked. First, let me tell you one very interesting thing that you have raised is, how can you build a model that can be as generic as possible? Now, in the AI ops, I'll give an example. The AI ops is basically, you can also divide into domain agnostic and which depends on the domain models. Now, the one that we are interested in developing is domain agnostic. Now, how we can build such a model, right? Now, for example, if you rely on pre-trained embedding models, that will not be very fruitful, right? However, like we have different domain data applications like applications network, etc. And the first stage is we have to still build some custom models, right? We have to, and then in the next phase, we have to integrate these models for getting final embedding models, and which is actually the information platform. And once we get into that stage where we have an integrated information platform, and then what we can do is we can use the next level, apply the next level of machine learning approaches, which can then build knowledge. For example, in our case, it's a spatio-temporal type of data, right? Data, actually, it's a spatial data and then the temporal data. And so, for example, we can apply graph technologies to understand how these grow, like how these events happens and how we can use the prediction thing. So definitely it is understanding the generic knowledge is a key, and to do more of, like us from the scalability perspective. Now, coming to this, another part, interesting part is from the security. I think you have asked a very specific questions and how we are going to have, for example, like when you have a data, they don't have the model. Like if you actually are building models, you don't want your models to be given to the data, right? So there are some works that is happening. I think the one very interesting work that is happening, which is called as a encryption, homomorphic encryption. So for example, what happens is the data is encrypted, and the encrypted data is, is applied to encrypted models. And so neither, like you can actually decrypt the model or, as a data provider, nor you can get the data. However, we have to remember this is a very early stage of research. Like this kind of, the complexity is very huge. I don't see many, I mean, it's just a research stage. I have been just briefly involved in this, but yes, it's a very early stage now to deal such scenarios. So still, we are relying on traditional, secure process where we'll be building some kind of a model, and probably the model will stay with us. Having said that, but still, they can do some kind of a reverse engineering. So it's not fully proof yet.
Thanks, Manu.
I think Ben, you have more points on this one, but I just wanted to jump in. I completely agree. The fact is there's a problem, which is people realize data is good, more data is better, and there is a lack of trust, and probably for generally good reasons. But if we can collaborate, pool our data, everybody wins. The question is how we get there technically, and then how do we build potentially a marketplace ecosystem where we enable and encourage people to do it. We're testing all sorts of things in that space now, but Ben, you're going to have, I know you mentioned all the data we're looking to procure, we're using for various reasons. You want to share more on what you're up to?
Yeah. One thing really quick that is semi-related. Rana, you mentioned encryption. So we're heavily looking at identity and authentication. So it's a big topic right now with Web3, ownership of your own data. You can have NFTs that you can use to authenticate. There's a decentralized component in there. And this concept of, I think you mentioned earlier, essentially having zero knowledge sharing, right? So zero knowledge proofs and multi-party compute. So it basically means like when you have a network of nodes, and if hackers go in and they hack one node, they can't really do anything with it because they need the information of the network, which is, again, decentralized ledgers, right? So same concept, more from an identity authentication perspective, or securing data, essentially. I think that's the one side that's really interesting, and we're heavily looking at that. Again, very early stage, interesting developments, how you can essentially build hyper secure distributed authentication mechanisms that are, apparently impossible to hack. I don't know if that's really true, but let's see how it goes. The other side is the data side, which is there is that federated data concept, and same story there, I would say. Federated data, federated machine learning. There are actually a number of very interesting companies that are fairly well funded from big firms that are doing a lot of good progress in that space. I've not seen a lot of things in production for that yet. There's definitely exploratory projects happening there. Very exciting trend. So we're thinking about it from think about banking, right? Bank benchmarking, just building essentially a derivative of the data in order to use it and share it in a safe, responsible, anonymous way, right? I think that use case, and it's not so much AI yet, right? But you can use machine learning modeling on top of that, and really just allowing easier data sharing across parties that traditionally don't want to share data, right? But showing them that you can do it in a safe, responsible, anonymous way, and really bringing compute to the data, right? Not transmitting any data. You don't have to like send from your data center anything to another data center to cloud. It's really bringing compute or algorithms to the data and then building derivatives of the data or building models of the data and potentially summarizing that up at a central aggregate level, or maybe just exchanging derivatives. Could even be synthetic data. That's an exciting trend out there. We're tracking that fairly closely and trying to push a few prototypes in that space.
Thanks. So in fact, we have tomorrow's session dedicated on 1 hour completely on identity and how identity is changing shape and form from Web 2 to Web 3, and how that change in shape form is giving the ownership back to the real owner of the data, and how that can be further used into aggregated data aggregation at the individual level, and then ask questions to that data and get the consent-based mechanisms involved in that. And at on the large organization side, how do we have the decentralized Web3 fabric integrated on those areas? Looking forward for tomorrow's thing. And one of the other areas, Rana, you mentioned about is the AI ops. I'm switching the context again a bit to the technology stack on that. So, Rana, what will be the good strategy? Because there's a lot of aggregation of the data that needs to happen before we even think about all these things, right? And since you are working AI ops, what do you think is a good strategy organization-wide to build AI data pipelines? And in your experience, is there any golden thumb rule on those areas?
Sure, that's quite critical to understand that to build such a data pipeline, we need a very robust and scalable pipeline. If you really think about this, like to give you an example, the data pipeline that we have built, it's a very comprehensive data pipeline. Like currently, daily basis, we are processing millions of data points. We are not only ingesting this data, but we are also processing it, and we are applying various AI/ML techniques to get pattern insights from this data. And but to do that, to mention some of the strategy here that we have used. First of all, from the tools and technology, we heavily relied on all open source technologies. We have used some of the latest technology stack here, like Kafka, Airflow, NiFi, Apache Flink, to build our event and batch processing pipeline. We have built the machine learning as a service. We have designed this in such a way that any new data source, we can integrate it with external data source, and user can see the insight from the data in matter of 2-3 days. So that's the kind of designing I'm talking about. So we really need to design something that the external data source can be built very quickly, and they can use the existing AI/ML techniques to do that, to get those insights. So yes, a lot of work has been going on in this area.
Right. And Rana, one last question to you about what are the challenges do you see for the organization building systems like this? You said what is the objective now? What's the hurdles or how? And there, I'm sure there are broad, but top 2 or 3 that you believe are the key challenges. And given this discussion, I think by now startups have picked up the key problem statements from this discussion. And if their technology stack is any way closer to that, I'm sure that they'll get motivated to come closer. So the last question to Rana about today's day.
Sure. I think from a large organization point of view, if you look into the investment wise, there has been not much investment, and mainly it has been very short-term investment. And as I said, most of the time the investment was to get something very quick, so tools with some AI capabilities, and which is why probably the main goal of AI ops has not been achieved. So I think the main challenge here, how to get investment for a very longer term. So maybe you are looking into the ROI, maybe after 3rd year or so, to really get that kind of things. Yes, so that is the main challenge from the investment side I'm talking about. However, it gets tremendous benefit even from the challenges that we face in terms of getting benefits to our customer. Like AIOps, though you might think it is just IT service operation and it is just for client to be happy that we have optimized in certain ways. However, it has also advantage that, like we can bring more transparencies if we can do it, design in such a way. And so, and this is one on top of that, what the client will be demanding in future from our AIOps system.
Thanks, Rana. So we are on the last 5 minutes of this marathon that we had right from the afternoon till late night. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll conclude the session as well as today's day. There is a closing session where Tushar, who will be managing the platform on the operations side, will be explaining about how to get help, or if there is any difficulty in applications, or how the stages will progress further on a very high level. And then I will be concluding the day with a quick summary about how we progress through the day and what are the key takeaways, and the bit of a sneak peek in the tomorrow's day and how exactly things will unfold. We have workshops planned for you. We have interesting sessions planned for you, right from the regulators to the founders of the unicorns, and guys like Polygon and Heather are going to come, and EarthID is going to come and talk about the insights on identity and how identity is something which will govern everything, and decentralized identity, what is the advantage, and how that in industry is setting the new trend, and how exactly the attached data to it is going to be evolving, and how these identities can be used across the board, not just the finance, but not just the banking, but finance plus open data, health ID integration, and everything that we do, how that can be attached to these IDs, and then centralized, decentralized IDs, and then how across the multiple ethoses you can create better intelligence out of it. Again, this is more futuristic, but unless until you dream, you don't reach those levels. And after the identity, we are going to have Web3 and how exactly Web3 is changing the shape and form. The world is going to the decentralized area. What are the practical implications of that? What are the innovations that are happening? One of the biggest ecosystem in Polygon, and their VP of strategy will talk about that. So this is how tomorrow's going to unfold. Please wait around for the closing session. We'll get the technicalities and operational ideas about things for the actual 26th August Ideathon. Today, we have broken open the fintech space literally into each segment and each. I'm sure that this has created a huge amount of thought process momentum, and I believe that is going to help you next week to build towards the pitch deck that you'll be putting in on 27th and 28th. So just to reiterate, please do apply. If you are waiting to applications at the last minute, it's going to be very tough for you to get the visibility that is needed. So don't wait for last minute, and we'll be looking forward for your applications. On top of that, we will be circulating the access for FIS Code Connect and Asset program towards mid of the week, and that is something which you can use alongside. And if your innovation is standalone, then you can present it in the pitch deck that you have. Again, we'll be covering this today in the closing session, tomorrow in the opening session, and again in the closing session to repeat the nuances. And if you have any questions, please send those, and we'll incorporate the answers for those things. Thank you everyone for this forum, and again, hope to see you in the judging and the other panels that we have planned in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Prashant.
Thanks, Prashant.
Thank you.
Thank you.